Bonjour et bienvenue. We are here at the governor's mansion right in the heart of Baton Rouge, and we have the honor today to be interviewing the governor of Louisiana, Mr. Jeff Landry. Hey, how's it going?
It's going great, and you?
Good. Comment ça va?
Ça va bien, et toi?
Très bien, très bien. Je suis très content d'être ici. To start, you just met with the French ambassador to the United States in his first official visit to Louisiana. What did you all discuss? Did energy come up, French language, or what else?
All of the above. I mean, you're doing good. Pick another one. You might get like 3 out of 3. We spent a good time talking about the French language, the culture here in Louisiana as it relates to our French heritage. We talked about energy, which is extremely important right now and a big issue in Europe as a whole, not only in France. We talked about other trade opportunities between Louisiana and France as well. So it was a great meeting.
Sounds great. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of opportunity. And then also on the culture side, we share a culture, heritage, history. We share so much, but then we do sometimes have very differing issues. So for example, whether it's abortion or the death penalty or religious liberty, Louisiana has a quite different view than France. Did that come up at all? And how do you explain Louisiana's position?
No, I think he touched upon some of the more international issues that they're having, the tension and strife that's going on in Eastern Europe right now, especially in Ukraine, which I think is creating, again, a lot of tension in Europe as a whole. And so it was a pretty great discussion. But yeah, I mean, certainly Europe is a different place than the United States, right?
Right.
And so, it's always great to have a discussion between those particular two cultures. I always find it fascinating when you think about Louisiana kind of has a unique area where, we've been kind of tossed about between France and Spain and England a couple of different times. And so it's always great to host an ambassador here at the mansion.
Right, and it's definitely a gumbo of influences.
Very much.
And that's what's interesting is that, of course, there's the culture side, but then there's huge economic opportunities, like you're saying, with the war in Ukraine. They're having the problem of energy sovereignty, and that's a solution that Louisiana could provide of being able to be a reliable source of energy for France and other European countries.
Well, America was always an economic opportunity for Europe to begin with. It's why they came here, right? It's why New Orleans was settled here. It's why so many wars were fought over the possession of New Orleans and the Louisiana territory was because of our abundance of natural resources, which certainly were then shipped over to Europe to then be processed into made goods, into commodities. And so I think we're no different than we were back then and having those same kind of discussions.
Right, exactly. And so changing tune a little bit, at your inauguration, whether it was your grandfather's name, Dieudonné, or the quote about your dad teaching the Acadian values of God, family, and country, your Cajun French heritage came up a lot. And so I was wondering, you grew up in St. Martin Parish, which is a very Cajun parish, obviously. Can you talk to us about how present the Cajun French language was when you were growing up? Is it something you heard your family members speaking, your parents or your grandparents?
Oh, yeah, my parents spoke French a lot, especially when they didn't want us to know what we were talking about, what they were talking about. But my mother was a French teacher as well. I think she had a minor in French. Her last name was Bienvenue. And so, of course, those descendants came directly from France over to New Orleans. My father's side of the family, the Landrys and the Champagnes, and even my grandmother on my mother's side, Broussards, all came from Acadie and settled Acadiana. And so, while it was speaking Parisian French, like my mother did, Cajun French like my father did, the French language was very common inside of the household or when we went to our grandparents. Or even to our uncles or aunts or great uncles and aunts.
Right.
In fact, I think I had a majority of my great uncles and aunts spoke almost nothing but French.
Right. We hear that story a lot. I mean, it seems like it's crazy, especially I'm from New Orleans, and I know it's part of our past, but then in some communities like St. Martinville or even down the bayou in Lafourche and Terrebonne, it was just one generation ago or two where everyone was speaking
French,
yeah. Right.
Yeah, in fact, when I ran for Congress the first time down the bayou, my father cut a commercial in French.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That we played strictly down the bayou and in St. Martin.
They'll understand it down there. And so speaking of, do you still speak some Cajun French? And what are some words or expressions that you remember from your upbringing?
Yeah, I do. I mean, every once in a while you get different phrases or sayings that our grandparents would say. Like I remember my grandmother telling me, like, fais attention, be careful, watch what you do. And, different little, I still know most of my animals in French and can still count. And I could probably get in and out somewhere. And sometimes you can pick up things that people are saying. You might not be able to repeat it or to be able communicate back to them, but you certainly have a deeper understanding about what they're trying to tell you. And so it'll come back. But of course, the more and more you're not exposed to that environment, the ear becomes less attuned, kind of like a piano, to the language.
Right, definitely. Fais attention is a good one. I feel like a lot of people, it's when the words they remember and the expressions they remember are the advice their grandparents or their parents were telling them about how to say on the right track and everything.
Right, right.
Cool. And so then speaking more broadly about that, most Louisianans are so proud of our culture and how unique our state is, including Cajun and Creole culture. But we are the language aspect is in a difficult place where in 1970, the statistics show that there were about 1 million native speakers of French in Louisiana, and now we're down to about 100,000. But the good news is that there's thousands of young people like myself and throughout the state that are very interested in keeping the language alive and through the schools and through entrepreneurship and through economic development. And so you plan to be a transformative governor, as I understood from your inauguration speech. And is that something, working to revitalize the Cajun French language and culture, is that something you'd be willing to kind of prioritize as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's one of the things that I talked to the ambassador about is that as we look through and see the success of the French immersion program, I asked him if whether or not we're doing enough to elevate it through the community college and higher education as well. And does that mean that we have to do it in all of the colleges and universities in Louisiana? Maybe not. We don't have to try to do it all at once, but we certainly can start at places like Nichols and UL and McNeese, areas under which that the ear to the French language is a little more tuned. And I think that when you look over the generational change that occurred, the change was so dramatic. And then, of course, if you look, like I'm an ex-gener, right? So I'm a latchkey kid. And that whole generation trying to then bring back that language inside of that generation at that particular time probably was extremely difficult because you couldn't understand. You were like, why are you forcing me to do it? Why am I don't really have to because my parents are speaking it. And if it was so important, maybe they should be teaching it to me. Those are all things that I think subtly and psychologically happen around that area. But I think that as the generations pass and that group gets older and they have kids and they have grandkids, they realize the treasure that is out there. And so the support of those kinds of programs and the support that they can then give their children or grandchildren to learn the language, I think is key. And I think music is an interesting way to do it. I think through the cultural aspect, through the festivals, I think that's the uniqueness about Louisiana. And so when people realize that uniqueness has an opportunity to be lost, then people have a tendency to maybe double down in their commitment to try to ensure that they don't lose it.
Right. I think that's a really good way to put it. I noticed that is that sort of like the coast right now, where when we see that we're losing the coast, it makes us realize, how it's so key to who we are and why we need to do something to keep it alive. And I don't know, as a young person in Louisiana, whether the economy, there's a lot of high stakes, as you know. I mean, you're in charge of kind of addressing them. But when you feel that you might lose something, I feel like that's when you feel inspired to fight, to keep it alive.
And I also think that other people start to recognize, especially as we go around. Certainly when I was in Washington, the accent that I picked up by living in, say, Martinville, and then those that you hear from down the bayou and that bring folks in from down the bayou to testify. I think that all of those things create just a unique, mystic atmosphere around Louisiana. And so in order to keep those things alive, we have to try to do our best to support that particular culture. And so hopefully we'll see if we can continue to do that and support things like the French immersion programs and to try to kind of spark the language back up again.
Right. Because I agree, it's both cultural and economic development, whether it's tourism, but also people move here. We need to deal with crime, we need to deal with some of these other problems, but there's that mystic quality that you talked about. It's like there's nowhere like Louisiana, and that attracts people here.
Right. I mean, and more young people today want to go and travel abroad, right?
Right.
And so if people in Louisiana, especially in South Louisiana, if younger students understood that, hey, this is a pathway that when you go travel abroad, you're going to be a leg up, right? When we were there, I can remember going in a French class and I didn't do too well. To my mother's vexing was mostly because I felt like I was being punished to learn it, But if when they understand it, it's a gateway rather than an impediment, more and more students, I think, would pick it up.
As an
Hey, this is,
opportunity.
you want to go to Paris? Oh, yeah, I want to go to Paris. Well, here's an opportunity to learn language. I think that those are the kind of things that when you incorporate them, when you incorporate the where do you go from here, or what are the opportunities, maybe we'll see more people participate in stronger programs.
Right, definitely. And so one last question. To that point, we find that the demand for keeping French alive, doing a French immersion program, or through learning Cajun French as an elective is much greater than the supply currently available. And so I know school choice is going to be a key part of your legislative agenda. And so what we know now is there's 41 French immersion programs, and there's a few examples like our Cajun French programming on LPB, and then the Lash Pod program in Vermilion Parish. But we find that the demand is much greater than supply. And so Representative Amade and also Senator Stein are working with a coalition of legislators to try to make, as part of the school choice agenda, make French immersion and Cajun French education more available to families that would choose that education or would want that education for their kids. Is that something you'd be interested in working with them
Yeah,
on?
I mean, when you say that, I think about it. If when I was in school, or certainly even in high school, and someone says, you know what, if you go and spend an hour with your grandfather, your grandmother, and let them talk French to you for an hour, and then you could come back and recite something, and we'll give you a full hour, I'd be like, oh, absolutely, because that means I could go to the camp with my grandpa and spend an hour less than in school. But again, I think when you start to create those different opportunities, which certainly the homeschool programs do, which I think is some of the attraction
Right.
of why homeschooling has become more and more popular. That certainly if we do it in a way that's not so restrictive, but more open and think outside the box, bringing some of the people who are left back into an opportunity to speak to kids, you may have a great opportunity. You may see better results.
A winner. Cool. C'est bon. Well, I know you're very busy, and so I guess we have many more questions, but hopefully we'll be able to do this again. And so I guess I'll just say, un grand merci.
Bien, merci.
Bien, merci. Merci beaucoup. See you next time.
Okay.
À la prochaine.